Your JDE Edwards system says it's integrated in real time, but is it really? What happens when session limits, orchestration timeouts, or stale data quietly break your business processes? In this episode, we're unpacking the hidden challenges of real time JDE integrations and how to solve them. Stick around. You'll learn how to avoid downtime, bad data, and missed opportunities in your integrations. Welcome back to Night Your Grandpa's JD Edwards. I'm your host, Nate Bushfield, and today we're pulling back the curtain on the technical side of real-time JDE integrations. When APIs, orchestrations, and external systems all connect, things don't always run as smoothly as the demo promised. Issues like session management slash statefulness, error handling, data freshness, and orchestration timeouts can cripple performance if you're not ready. But to help us break it down, I'm joined by Mo Shujaat. Great friend of the pod, obviously, Mo. I mean, you've been here a lot of times and hell, even a few times in the past few weeks. But he is the VP for Application Advisory here at ERP Suites for the listeners that are new and might not know that. Mo, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Oh, having a great day so far. Finally hit a little bit of a heat wave, but I don't know. There's this whole like blob thing that everyone's talking about right now in terms of weather patterns. So it seems like it's going to be the coldest winter yet in Chicago. Great time to move here, I've heard.
I'm getting ready to pack for a trip to Cancun, so I'm just waiting to run away from the winter, and hopefully that's the week it'll snow the most here in Cincinnati.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Cincinnati, that's the best thing about Cincinnati. It'll be snowing, freezing cold, and then they'll wake up the next morning, it'll be 65 and you can go golf. It doesn't make any sense, but I love that about Cincinnati. I really do.
It's bright and sunny and shining outside today, so yeah.
Yeah.
What I am excited to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is integrations.
Yeah. And so when we actually talk about real-time integrations in JD Edwards, what does that actually mean?
So, it's kind of funny how this world of integrations has changed, and it's changed so fast, right? So, if you would have asked me the same question like 8 years ago, I would have told you, um, oh, it's a huge pain in the butt to do real time integrations with JD Edwards, right? You ask me this question now, and I would say it is extremely easy, it's extremely efficient, and it is probably the best way for you to integrate right now, right? So in just like 6 to 7 years, the entire landscape with integrations in JD Edwards has totally changed, completely changed, right? And it has been like really cool for somebody like me who started their career in JD Edwards to see how it's changed and think about how I wrote integrations at the start of my career as a JD Edwards consultant and how it's so different the way I write them now.
Yeah, it's one of those things that obviously, like with everything in JD Edwards, it really has evolved, and it's cool to see. It is cool to see. I also like how you threw in a nice little 6-7 joke. I'm sure that our kids at home will love that.
That was unintentional. That was unintentional.
Oh, but what's the biggest misconception that maybe you see companies today have with real-time integrations?
I think the misconception that companies still have to this day with JD Edwards is that it can't do real-time integrations, right? Like, and I don't blame them because for the longest time, we in JD Edwards world, we lived in the world of flat file integrations. Like that was the way you integrated with JD. You dropped a flat file on a folder, you ran a table conversion program, and then you imported data to a Z file, and then you ran a Z file processor. Now doing all like, wow, I don't even want to do it anymore, right? I basically want to be able to just host an API, have that API be standardized. I want to be able to hand out documentation to my partners to say, here's how you connect to my API. And just send the data right in, right? So, I mean, it's a totally different world of real time API based integrations.
100%. I mean, yeah, at least to me, it always seemed like real time was more marketing than a reality. Like is that something that's still true, or are there some cases that real time is actually real time?
No, I would say we now live in a world where real time is real time. Like, We have customers that are receiving orders in from third-party systems, and those orders are getting entered into JD Edwards in literally seconds or fractions of seconds. And I'm not talking like 1, 2-line orders. I'm talking of hundreds of lines orders that are going through advanced pricing, that are going through configurator, that are going through any of the advanced functionality that you could do in JD Edwards, right? So really all of this wouldn't have been possible without the orchestration layer. But now we have the ability to really create actual true real-time synchronization between your third-party systems and JD Edwards, right? And really, there's no excuse now to not be synchronizing your data real time unless there's a real big need to not have to do things real time.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of impressive to even think that we can actually achieve a real time like that. Especially obviously in the olden days of JD Edwards, like floppy disks. With the idea of a floppy disk to me, by the way, just a little quick tangent, still can't wrap my head around that. I don't
Yeah.
I like what was the process there? You gotta have this giant machine to put in a floppy disk, whatever. But obviously where we're going with JD Edwards and everything that has been evolving is it's obviously it doesn't surprise me that real-time integrations are real now. Because year 2 ago, even, it really wasn't. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Anyways, what role does session management slash the statefulness play in JD orchestrations, and how does it feel when like how does it trip up those real-time integrations?
So I think like up until probably like two major releases ago, so I think 927, you could do real-time integrations, but there you would always hit the scenario of needing to maintain state or needing to manage sessions that you really couldn't do, right? And then boom, I just don't know how. Shout out to AJ and Paul at and John and the whole Oracle product team. I don't know how, but they basically read the customer base's mind and were like, hey, here's this great feature around statefulness and orchestrations. So now, starting from like 927, we really have the ability to make almost any kind of real time API you need to. I would say probably the only area where we have some limitations is like webhooks. But shameless plug, AJ or Paul, if you listen to this, please give us webhooks. We really want it. But really now when we have the stateful orchestration capability, I think, you now really have the ability to basically have systems connect to JD Edwards and not have to necessarily wait on JDE anymore, right? Systems can connect to JDE, they can send things to JD Edwards. JD Edwards can now maintain the orchestration, can now maintain state, it can do the things that it needs to do. And then once it's done, it can return responses back to the system and the communicating system, and all is right with the world and all the data is synced, right? Um, and as a note, Onyx is a big fan of stateful orchestrations, so please make sure you use stateful orchestrations when you're building them. They're not necessary everywhere, right? But in the scenarios where maintaining state makes a lot of sense with an orchestration. Like, so for example, you you have a third-party system that sends something to JD Edwards, right? Now JD Edwards is going to do something, and it now needs to wait on some other processes. It needs to wait on some other things to finish. You can have it kind of wait and pause. You can have it pause. And after it's done doing all the other downstream stuff it needs to do, it can then resume the orchestration and communicate back to the third party system and say, hey, either asynchronously or synchronously, depending on timeouts and sessions, right? That hey, I got what you sent me, and whatever you sent me is done processing downstream, right? Prior to that, we would have to always do these things asynchronously, right? So you would have to send something to JD Edwards, and basically it would feel like sending it into the nebulous void, and you don't know if it actually really did what you needed it to do. And then you have to kind of create these two-stage bi-directional integrations. But honestly, having the ability to maintain state with orchestrations is really nice because now we can create very synchronous, kind of more robust, complex processes, right? So I'm super excited to see how that evolves as customers start to connect more things to JD Edwards. Because I really don't think it's something that a lot of the customer base has started using yet. But I think once they do, it'll be tremendously beneficial, right? So yeah.
You talked about how complex some of these things can be. What happens if there's maybe too many orchestrations that hit JD Edwards at once?
Yeah, that's a real consideration. So, whenever I'm helping a customer with kind of going through their integration journey or their API journey, they kind of go through similar like evolutionary stages, right? So when you're first starting to dip your toes into API, you're always talking about point to point kind of API, like one to one API integrations, right? As you mature and you evolve your API strategy and your integration strategy, you start to take into factors like heavy volume, stress, scalability, right? Those kinds of things all matter. So then you want to take into consideration things like load balancing, things like API gateways or API management, right? Because you don't want to you don't want to expose JD Edwards to like an external system that's outside of your firewall, right? Um, so there's a lot of considerations that go into that. And to be honest, that tends to become more of an architectural question than it does an
Mm.
integration question because it has less to do with like there's a factor of how you integrate that matters, but mostly it matters on how you architect the whole ecosystem of integrations you have in your IT tech stack, right? So this is where like middlewares and ESBs, so it's like service buses and iPaaS tools and all those things start to get in, and API gateways, right? So there's a whole architectural strategy that you want to talk about and you want to consider once you're starting to like really get serious about doing a lot of third party integrations with APIs and orchestrations, right? Because um you have to worry about session management, you have to worry about load balancing, you have to worry about token refreshing, right? There's all these things that kind of go into it, and it starts to become a more of an architectural question, right?
Yeah. And specifically about those session pool, like managing the session pools and even the load balancing, are there best practices that you would say that some of these companies should do? Or is it just figure it out yourself type situation?
You definitely don't have to figure it out, and I'm not an architectural expert, right? So like my expertise is definitely in the building of the integration and stuff like that. But like we have amazing CNCs and amazing network admins on our team who kind of help customers through that. And from what I've learned from them and what they've always talked about is right, you want to have very like you want to focus a lot on authentication, you want to focus a lot on session management, you want to focus a lot on load balancing, right? Ideally the big thing is there's this balance between security and load, right? So so you want to make sure that everything's staying secure, you're managing load and none of it's compromising performance, right? The last thing you want to do is have an integration that's basically taxing your system so much that it's taking down a production server, right? Not saying that that doesn't happen, it can happen, but typically we want to avoid those things from happening by architecting and designing these integrations in ways that, they're not creating zombie kernels, they're not, doing never ending processes or loops, they're not taxing system resources, they're well distributed, they're they're performant and they have exception handling kind of built into it. So there's some best practices that you can do in all these just to make sure that like like I said, you don't basically cause problems for users in production.
Yeah, and it's the little things in that, like obviously we can sit here and say, oh, there's things that you can do in load balancing, session management, and that type of stuff. But that's what you have like specific people for. That's what you have these specialists for. Lean into it, ask them, because they'll tell you what to do if you do not know. And that's the main.
And every environment's different, right? Like, so you really want to make sure that you're doing this for your environment, right? Like if you're a Azure shop that uses Dell Boomi is your middleware or Informatica is your service bus or right, like your and then you have like a CISO that has these kind of architectural requirements or security requirements, right? All of those things are going to play a factor into this, right? If you have specific security requirements around certificates, if you have specific security requirements around kind of how long someone's allowed to authenticate for, right? There's so many factors that go into this that honestly, even if this is like, if a customer even asks me this, usually my next solution is like, hey, let's get you in front of an expert and let's get you talking to them and let's have you describe how you run your infrastructure stack and then have them give you a recommendation on what really works, right? So yeah, every situation is a little bit unique here.
Yeah, of course. I mean, every environment's very different. And that's the main thing to understand in this situation where it will always change depending on the situation, depending on the environment. And as long as you know that, and as long as you have the right people in the room that will figure it out for you, it's going to be fine. Now, to switch topics a little bit, what makes more of a air handling in real time JD Edwards integrations so tricky?
So I would say, the main thing that makes it air handling in real time integrations tricky is that there just are so many scenarios sometimes, right? Like there's just so many errors and exceptions that can happen. So when you're going through it, you try to make sure that you program for and account for as many errors and exceptions as you possibly can. But inevitably, you're going to come across a scenario that you miss. Like it's just bound to happen. Nobody, no human being can predict everything unless you're like the integration Nostradamus, right? Um, honestly, that's kind of a cool nickname. That's what I'm gonna start referring to myself as the integration Nostradamus.
Good idea.
Um, but like, so you're not gonna be able to predict everything, but you do want to try to predict for like the basic things, like, okay, if hey, what if somebody forgets to pass a blank date and, somebody passes a blank value into this, right? So and to be honest, like even we weren't super great about testing and for every exception scenario. But what we've done in the past year is start to build out a function where when we're building an integration, we kind of have our unit testing go through basically every crazy scenario you can imagine. Like what if an entire chunk of the JSON array just went missing? Like, what would happen to the integration, right? Would it just blow up or would it fail in the middle and send an email to somebody, right? Like, those are all valid questions. So we try to do a lot of that stuff now as we're building things. And you have to build that resiliency into the integrations, right? Like I said, you're always gonna find something that you missed, which is okay, that happens, right? But the real key is trying to make sure you account for as much as you possibly can beforehand, and building the exception handling kind of around it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also a way that you can prevent like silent errors, is if you get in front of it and you attach alerts, I'm sure, to that side of it. I mean, it's those type of things that, yeah, the blanks that you have in there. Yes, that's a simple example, but it is probably one of the biggest things that people have happen. So as long as you have the alerts that are attached to that, or one of those things in JD Edwards that will actually show it to you, should be fine. But what's the difference between like the handling the errors inside JD Edwards versus maybe an external middleware type situation?
So, both are going to have some similar capabilities that, like, hey, they can both like email you and things like that. Where handling these inside of JD Edwards is a really, really neat prospect is that you can actually auto correct some data based on your exception handling, right? So, I think a feature that's probably not used as much, but it should be, right? Is kind of what you do when you encounter an error that's a corrective action, right? So a lot of times when we think about error handling and exception handling, we think a lot about notifying somebody, right? It's kind of like, hey, you get into trouble, something bad happens, you call an adult, right? But as your systems are getting smarter, we need to kind of teach them how to fix things on their own, right? So for example, maybe if a system is getting sent in and the customer number is missing, right? Maybe rather than sending it maybe just stopping, right? Maybe you write that data somewhere, you still notify somebody, but then if there's any accompanying documents or any place else where the customer number could be, you can teach the orchestration, go look up that customer number, right? If, for example, a item number is missing or an item number is like for example, your vendor sends you their item number instead of yours or yours instead of theirs, whatever you need, right? you can go look up that data inside of JD Edwards and correct it before it goes in. The other thing, so I think one of those things is that's really the benefit of doing exception handling inside of JD Edwards is that you have the opportunity to reference JDE to like fix some of these things. But that's not to say you can't do exceptional handling in your middleware. You may still need to, because you might have exceptions that happen at the middleware layer that occur before they even get to JD Edwards, right? But in general, when we're talking about exception handling in E1, we want to focus on both notifying somebody, but also seeing if we can correct that in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, having those alerts, having a dashboard where you can see all these things. I mean, it sounds simple, but sometimes it's just not something that a lot of customers even think about.
Or so like in programming, we have something called a try catch exception, right? So so like sometimes we just want to try and see if we can catch an exception. And then if there is something, see if we can fix it and then try it again. Right. And it may still be an error, right? It may still be an error, but at least if we know that, hey, our of all of our errors, this is the 40% most common, this is the 30%, it's the 20%, right? Can I at least build some try catch logic to account for those 40 to 20% of exceptions and then see if I can correct something and reprocess it. And then maybe I'm not going to eliminate 100% of my errors, right? But at least I'm going to eliminate maybe 15 to 20 to 30% of my errors. And that's 30% less than you were dealing with yesterday. So, I think it's a win.
Yeah, honestly, when you said that, you flashed me back to college. So I'd like to move on, actually. So what is like the data freshness? Like, why is that a hidden challenge in integrations? And what's the business impact of even like stale data in JD Edwards?
So yeah, like that's a really good question. And I think there's layers to it. So just to make sure I don't rant, I'm going to, to think about it a little bit because um like data freshness inside of JD Edwards is silly how important it is, right? If your data is old, like JD Edwards is an interconnected system, right? Like everything, what the left hand does impacts what the right hand does, right? Um, and if you have data that's stale upstream, now everything downstream is stale, right? So one of the examples I love to use is if you have a planning parameter, an MRP wrong for one dependent demand item, that can actually throw off your planning for almost for hundreds of other items depending on how it's used, right? So the impacts of stale data are very pervasive inside of the system. If you have inventory that's in the wrong location, right? And you have sales orders and work orders and all the stuff that's committing to that location, and you try to go pick that inventory and it's not there. Well, you've just wasted tons of man hours. You've caused late customer orders, right? It's just, you want to make sure you have data that's as fresh as possible. And one of the areas, specifically in terms of integrations, where people just absolutely overlook how they can make data more fresh is integrating their data, their master data between their third-party systems and JD Edwards, right? So, for example, if you have customers coming in from Salesforce, you can now real-time sync them with JD Edwards. If you have Salesforce and JD Edwards and you're on 9.2.7 plus, why are you not real-time syncing customer information between JD Edwards and Salesforce? You update a customer in JD Edwards, it syncs to Salesforce right away. You update a customer in Salesforce, it syncs to JD Edwards right away. That's a reality in today's world. And we don't have to live like this anymore. Like nobody's forcing us to live like this besides our own limitations. So, like I said, I'm going to rant about this because I think it's really important. But data freshness, so data synchronization between enterprise grade systems like ERP, CRMs, HRISs, all these different systems, you can make this all real time now. You don't have to make it so a flat file comes once a week and it gets dropped into a folder. And if Jeff from IT is not awake at 2 in the morning. That folder doesn't run that file into JD Edwards, and now all of a sudden payroll is delayed tomorrow, right? Like we don't have to live in this world anymore because now we can sync master data real time and keep our data fresh between our systems.
Yeah, and it's weird that you say specifically 2 AM and payroll there. Are there any specific examples where outdated data cause serious downstream issues?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you talk about, I mean, we've countless examples of customers where EDI data is set up incorrect, or if you have customer cross-reference data that's set up incorrect, or if you have pricing data that's set up incorrect, or if you have customer master data that's set up incorrect, where now all of a sudden all these prices are wrong, these orders are wrong, emails have been sent to the wrong place, right? The events are the impacts are pervasive, right? So we have I have lots of examples in my career. Those are every JD Edwards practitioner does in their career of where stale, outdated, not maintained master data has bit you in the butt. Yeah. We love to
Yeah.
talk, we love to sit and have drinks and tell war stories about this stuff, you know? It's fun, but it's probably every JD Edwards consultant's favorite thing to do.
Yeah, it's something we talk about on this podcast a lot too, is a lot of clean data, a lot of fresh data. Like it seems so simple. It truly does, especially in this day and age. Like fresh data is something that we all use. Like hell with your cell phone these days. You see fresh data every single time you open that.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's weird.
It it's like, it's like if I put a reel up on Instagram, you can see that same reel in Facebook real time. Like that's what I'm talking about. Like that's the world you could live in with JD Edwards, where like you update a customer's credit limit, and now it's updated in Salesforce right away. Not an hour from now, not 2 hours from now, not at 2 a.m. tonight, right then. Right. Like you update, you hit okay, it's already in Salesforce by the time you go log in and refresh your page in Salesforce. Like that's the golden standard, and we should all be aiming for it.
Yeah, exactly. And hell, we're all used to it these days anyway. So why are we settling for anything less? Why are we doing it? But how do you balance that like freshness with maybe even performance for these like in the reporting worlds or even in the integrations?
Um, you know, uh, my DNCs would probably hate me for this answer, but I have to give it is get more resources. I'm just kidding. You don't always have to do that. Is number one. I think balancing performance, first of all, comes with um is masterful design. That's really my philosophy, right? Um, there's this like there's this like class of people who are like, oh, I'm gonna write this really complicated, very bloated, big integration so I can show off a screenshot with 45 steps, right? And I feel really good about it. And I just look at that and that freaks me out because I'm just like, wow, that thing is gonna break at some point and I'm gonna have no idea how to troubleshoot that, right? So for me, I think for me, performance, the first step of performance comes from design, right? So your design has to be simple, it has to be elegant, and your design itself has to come with performance and scalability in mind. And what I just described is honestly super hard to do, right? This is not easy, right? Um, like, you know, if you really have mastered something, you know how to make it simple. And the thing with integrations is that you want to make them as simple as possible, especially if they're real-time synchronization integrations, because you don't want to create a lot of load, right? You could have things going back and forth. Like we have a customer that's syncing data between Salesforce and JD Edwards, and you could have 30 people updating customers kind of at the same time, really, right? So you think about it,
Mhm.
that's a lot of load going back and forth between these APIs that are constantly talking back and forth to each other. So you want to make sure that they're very, very simple, right? You don't need to put extra things in there. You don't need to put a lot of extra capabilities in there. And where you can offload workload, where you can kind of offload some workloads onto other work streams inside of JD Edwards, right? So like if you can park some data and then run a UB asynchronously because you don't really need to run it synchronously, go ahead and do that. if you can leverage a business function or an NER, because you're going to get a little bit more performance out of it, do that. If you can leverage a logic extensions are amazing for performance. They've actually been very, very performant, in my opinion. Leverage a lot of logic inside of your logic extension. You don't need to put like 17 if rules in your orchestration. You can just build a logic extension that kind of does that. And then gets the data where it needs to be, right? So it's good.
Mhm.
The heavy lifting is contained in one step rather than many steps, right? And there's like these different tips and tricks that we learn, and honestly, a lot of consultants will say like, "Oh yeah, I've always known this," and to be honest, we haven't. We learned a lot of that through getting our teeth kicked in, right? Like we'll build an integration for a customer and be like, "Yeah, this is going to be great," and then we start to UAT it and we send 2,000 orders in at the same time, and we're like, "Oh my god, that's going to break in that same spot." We just realized, right? And then we'll go fix it. So even us as integration developers, we get our we get our stuff rocked all the time with integration. So we learned this through the school of hard knocks, right? Like we learned this by building integrations, not by talking about them only, right? So what I'll say to you is the best thing to do is how to make an integration performant is build an iteration of it, test the ever living daylights out of it, just slam it, just slam every possible scenario, thousands of orders, hundreds of people trying to use it at the same time, just slam every scenario, see where it breaks, and then make a second iteration of it that's more performant, right? Orchestrations are meant to be iterative. That was a whole philosophy behind them. So iterate.
Yeah. And honestly, that sounded just like a teacher of mine. Just test it, test it, test it. If it breaks, fix it. Like that's all you can really do sometimes. And
And make it
honestly,
better for the next time. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And that's a real way to learn. I mean, that's a real way of doing it, which is fantastic there. But talking about orchestration timeouts, they're obviously one of the most frustrating integration issues. Why do they happen? And how can teams really avoid them?
Um, you know, generally, if an orchestration is timing out, something's gone wrong, right? Um, so first of all, again, I would say it starts with design. Um, we spend when we're talking about orchestrations, we spend a lot of time in design. I think sometimes it may confuse customers a little bit of how much time we spend in design, but part of that is because of how we've learned how to build integrations. At least how I've learned how to build them is that the design really matters, right? Because you can build and iterate quickly. But the design, if you don't design something well, like it takes a lot, it doesn't perform as you need to, right? So I think time managing timeouts really starts with design. The second thing about managing timeouts is to make sure that you're not creating any sort of never-ending loops inside your orchestration. That like, hey, it doesn't just fall like three orchestration layers deep and then it's just kind of stuck somewhere, right? Sort of like server performance issues. You're not going to have a timeout really. You may have a timeout with a server's like AIS is not responding or something like that. But you want to make sure that now there's some real timeout scenarios, right? So we don't talk about these as much, but sometimes JD Edwards takes a minute to do something, right? Like let's say you have to run a UBE and that UBE is going to take a while to run, right? That's where the statefulness of orchestration comes in, right? So I can have an orchestration that's maintaining state, and it's kind of hanging out while things are happening. That means that my consuming system doesn't really have to hang out. It can just send us asynchronous reply or request. My orchestration can kick something off. It can maintain state. It can wait. It can wait until things are done. And then, after a while, it can then send a response back to the requesting system and saying, hey, what you wanted is done, right? It's still technically, it's still technically a two-stage connection, right? But the JD Edwards process is synchronous, right? And this is really helpful for things where it just takes a while and other systems really don't want to hog up their resources to really be waiting on JD Edwards, right? Like if you have something like a Salesforce or if you have a Shopify or something like that, they're not going to wait around, like because they're cloud-based systems, so they have very strict governor limits on how long you can have a timeout. Because you don't want you're in a cloud with lots of other customers, you don't want to be hogging up resources, right? So For them, they're gonna have a native built-in timeout, right? I think like 240 seconds sometimes, it's like somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes, whatever their native timeout is. So if you know that there's chances that you're going to go past their native timeout, make your orchestration stateful, and therefore you can still kind of control how everything's working.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, making it stateful is definitely the right way to go in this. Is there any other way that you would say, like, here's a different fix, like maybe breaking them into smaller orchestrations or um setting retry policies or even using queues for heavy workloads?
Mhm. Yeah, so I mean, all of those are great examples. Queues are another really great example, right? With orchestrations, because you can do queues in orchestrations, and run them on specific queues, right? Um, there's also other methods of, sometimes breaking things up. And sometimes there's these methods of just truly making things asynchronous, right? Like we just really break it up into two steps, right? It doesn't always need to be in one step. I might contradict myself, but real time is amazing and I loved it. But sometimes it's okay to just have a bulkified or batch integration, right? Um, I think there's lots of creative ways where you can design around it, but it's really going to depend on what ultimately the requirements of the customer are, and what the requirements of what the other systems can kind of accommodate, right?
Yeah. So let's put this episode all together. What, like, if you had a JD Edwards team out there right now, what would be three best practices that would make their real-time integrations reliable?
I would say number one, try to make sure that you have good monitoring kind of built around everything, right? Whether you're using the orchestrator monitor or if you're going through some sort of a middleware tool and you use their monitoring. We have some customers that actually write JD Edwards AIS data to even like Power BI. If you use our scalability tool, or sorry, not our scalability tool, if you use our clarity tool, you can get a lot of insights from that. Monitoring everything is really good. Trying to make sure you're building things with good retry and error handling capabilities, right? So we just built an integration for a customer where um we have an order that doesn't sync with Salesforce, so we retry it at least 3 times, right? So it'll kind of keep a counter, it'll try, and then if it still doesn't work, it'll let someone know. And that retry count is also a configurable feature, right? Um, you know, the other thing really is to know when to kind of use what. Don't try to fit a square peg into a round hole, right? Like if real time is amazing, I love real time integrations. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about them. But sometimes if a batch integration is fine and it will get the job done, you can do a batch integration, right? Knowing when to use what is better than always doing one method or the other, because that's how you kind of make sure that you're using the right tool for the job, right? Um, and the last one I would say is spend a good amount of time in designing them, right? Talk about design, build a couple iterations. And when I say design, I don't just mean like do it only on paper, right? I mean like build it. Like design a version, build a version. Design a second version, build a second version. Like just get it out on paper, build it bare bones, build a skeleton of it, right? Design as you like build as you design too, because that itself will teach you how to make things a little bit better. And honestly, like one of the things I love to do is phone a friend.
Yeah.
Like if you've got a buddy or someone or someone a trusted advisor on orchestration building, call 'em up and send their orchestration. Like so, one of the things I love to do, even though I lead our consulting practice, is still build orchestrations with my developers. And it's one of my favorite things is when a developer on my team calls me and says, "Mo, can you take a look at my orchestration?" And we're walking through it, and I think just going through that process of talking through the orchestration with me helps them design it, you know, 2 or 3 times better than if they were just trying to do it on their own, right? So, yeah, phone a friend if you need help.
Yeah, sometimes talking with people that don't know what's going on and trying to explain it to them like they're 5 years old, it makes it simple.
Yeah.
It's weird like that. It really is. And I think one more that you might have forgotten here, test the living shit out of it. Take it straight
Yeah.
from you. Test it, test it,
Kick
test it, test it.
kick it every which way you possibly can. Yeah, kick the tires.
Exactly. But, if JDE real-time integrations aren't as reliable as you like, ERP suites can help. From orchestration design to integration health checks, we make sure your JDE environment runs smoothly. We were talking about phone a friend earlier. Phone Mo or visit erpsuites.com to learn more. And you can even find Mo and his team on there and you can connect with them. But
It's the integration Nostradamus style.
oh, the integration Nostradamus. I forgot. My bad. We'll change that on our About Us page so you guys aren't confused. But that's a wrap for today's episode of Not Your Grandpa's JD Edwards. Remember, real-time integrations aren't just about speed, they're about reliability. Subscribe, leave a review, leave a like, share it with your team. But until next time, integrate smart, not just fast. Thank you.